Hi, this little video is going to be all about using and not abusing sources. As you know, this week I had to do 3 readings. We had to just skim chapter 5, which talks about different kinds of evidence, had you look at the art of quoting, which is from the book They Say, I Say, and really this is a great reading because it talks about the why and how of quoting. I also really like it because it gives some great examples. But for the real nitty-gritty of quoting, I wanted you to read Appendix 2 because it has lots of great examples and lots of essential information that you need when you're writing a research paper. So let's take a look at some of the things from Appendix 2 in detail. One of the first things that they mention in Appendix 2 is the whole idea of reading rhetorically. And this is really connected to what they say in the book They Say, I Say. Basically, you want to ask yourself 2 questions. First, what did they say? Why did they say it? As you're reading, you want to be thinking about, who is this author? Who are they writing to? Who's their audience? And why is this point so important? And then if you know that, you can answer the next question, which is how does what they say fit in with what I want to say? How is that going to work in my paper? What is it going to support? How's it going to, make the ideas that I have move forward? And in your book, there's this great, great table on page 278 that basically you can tell in my book I wrote they say, I say right here in the book. And it goes through all these questions that you can ask when you're trying to evaluate that first question of, what are they saying, why are they saying it? And then the second part, questions of how can I decide how to put this into my own paper? These are great questions to look at. Next thing that you're going to want to remember from the book is this section on purposeful note-taking. I love this quote from page 279, where they explain that good note-taking includes recording bibliographic information, or the citation for each source, recording information and ideas from each source, i.e. the summary and quotations, and responding to each source with your own ideas and exploratory writing. So there's these 3 things that you need to have. The citation, a summary and quotes, and your own ideas. Does this sound familiar? It should. Yep, it's the research journal. That's the assignment we've been doing all semester. And even though you don't have any more research journals due, I hope that you will continue to use that format for your notes because it really will help you to keep track of ideas and to help you avoid plagiarism. Also in the book on page 280, there's this great table that gives you even more strategies for taking notes, and I suggest you check that out. Next thing to pay attention to. After you've identified some sources, you've carefully taken notes, then you need to be able to evaluate those sources even on a deeper level. So on page 281 to 283, they give you just a couple of strategies for how to evaluate. You want to look at reliability. Is it accurate? Especially want to watch out for that on web pages. You're going to be looking at credibility. This is where you really watch out for those fallacies that we've been talking about. Angle of vision, what do they believe or value? Degree of advocacy, who do they work for? This is basically just making sure that your source is not biased, or if it is biased, that you're aware of that and you acknowledge that. An obvious example of evaluating a source is looking at any political cartoon that you see. It's very clear when you look at a political cartoon like this what they're advocating. Clearly this cartoon is making fun of the Republican Party, talking about how they cater to the rich and how the poor and the middle class are left out. Clearly this is a biased article, but it could still be used as an analysis if you were talking about, political problems in the United States. You could talk about the kind of assumptions that people generally make about the Democratic versus Republican parties. But of course you'd want to point out this is biased, as all political cartoons are. So, looking on, after you've evaluated your sources, and you're thinking about, you've pulled out the ideas, and now you want to decide how to use them in your paper. And there are many ways to do this. For now, I've had you just pull out direct quotes, but it's also useful to know that you can summarize and paraphrase a quote as well. And those are really, really important and useful strategies. A couple things to remember. A summary is brief and to the point. Paraphrasing is a great strategy, but you want to make sure that you do not patch write. And finally, a direct quote. There are some special formatting for direct quoting that you need to know. And in your book, I just want to point out some pages that will really give you great advice on that. First of all, page 284. They give you these just awesome examples of 2 quotes from the exact same source. They give you the original source. In the first one, she's giving a summary and a paraphrase. a little bit of a paraphrase of the material, but mostly summary. You can see here that they show you in green, that's where the writer's claim is. That's what they have to say. They've identified the source, made it very clear, they've introduced their information, and then they've given a summary of the information. In this thing, you'll notice that they didn't add a whole lot after that of their own interpretation of that information, but that's because when you summarize, you're generally kind of using what you say and what they say kind of wrapped up together. Down here, however, you can see same thing. The writer introduces their claim, they identify the source, they paraphrase the source. You know, they're still, again, making sure that they identify where the information is coming from for each of those. And then what I really like is that they have this little I say part at the end where they summarize the whole thing and let you know this is the point I want you to go away with. In short, they live longer because they take better care of themselves, meaning vegetarians, not because they avoid meat. So this is really, these are both really great examples for how to incorporate quotes into your own writing. Page 284, definitely make sure you check that out. The next thing that you'll want to look for, again, is this patch writing thing. You definitely want to avoid this. Page 286 gives you this great example of what patch writing looks like. When you take the original source and you pull direct wording from that source without directly acknowledging that with quotes. It's not enough just to say where it came from. If you're directly using their words, you have to put it in quotes. Otherwise, you have to significantly change the wording and the sentence structure so that it really is your own words. Again, check out page 286 and it'll give you more examples for how to do that. Next thing that you're going to want to look at is making sure that you have the right punctuation. So you see right here, we have the attributive tag. That's basically just where you say where the source came from. Right after that, there's a comma, and then these quotation marks. This is where the source starts. This one's capitalized because you're quoting an entire sentence. Notice here on the end, this is really important. The quotation mark comes before the citation and the period comes after the citation. Definitely want to remember that kind of punctuation in your own writing. Another example to look at is right here. And this is where they're not quoting an entire sentence, they're just quoting parts of the sentence, but notice they still have the quotation marks. They still have the citation after. Sometimes, if there's not a particular page number, you don't have to put the parentheses in the page number after, but you still make sure you have that attributive tag at the beginning and that you mention, again, this is where this source comes from whenever you're quoting something. It's really, really important. All right, so that's page 288. Page 289 also, I thought this was interesting. They talk about how to do citations. In general, it's important to know that people prefer for you to say up front who your source is. You can put it after the quote and just say this is where this information came from. But in general, if you can, it's good to just up front say this is my source. Times when you would not put it first is maybe if it's from a website and there's not a clear author, then you might just put that after. But if it's a generally strong source, you know, the American Council of Science and Health, go ahead and mention that up front because that's going to make your paper have a little bit more authority. All right, we've talked about the nitty-gritty of punctuation and evaluating sources. The next stage is, of course, avoiding plagiarism. This is something you have to be careful of, but it's something that I don't want you to stress out too much about. Basically, you need to remember that, first of all, you need to take careful notes so that you can remember what you said versus what came from the original source. And then you need to basically just make sure that you summarize, paraphrase, and quote the right way. In your book on page 290, there's this little table that talks about kind of the three kinds of things that writers can do. You want to be over here in the green arrow. This is the ethical use of sources. But most people, if they get confused at all, they're not going to be over here in the fraud section. I very rarely have a student who will just out and out do something that's completely obviously dishonest. But the tricky part is right here in the middle. You know, the patch writing, sometimes people can fall into that, or they're just not indicating the source because, again, poor note taking, they haven't kept track of which source and which material came from where. But again, if you're confused or you're wondering about plagiarism, go back to this section 290, and then of course feel free to ask me any questions if you're wondering, you know, am I doing this right? Is this plagiarism? I'm happy to answer those questions. So We've talked about plagiarism. Last but not least, in your textbook in the appendix, it talks about MLA and APA. Remember that you only have to do one or the other. I do not expect you to use both citations in your paper. In fact, that would be wrong because it would be very confusing. The whole purpose is to help somebody else who is in the field be able to track your research. So if you're generally a humanities person or in the social sciences, that will kind of help you decide which one you're going to use. MLA is definitely for the humanities. APA is more for the social sciences or hard sciences. I like in the last book how they talk about your works cited and references page. If you're an MLA, your last page is called the works cited page. If you're an APA, it's called the references page. Just remember three things. Your works cited or your references page should be a separate page from the rest of your paper, completely separate page. It's still turned in with your paper, but it's on its own page. The sources should be in alphabetical order, and you need to have hanging indents, which means when your sources are basically formatted, the first part where the author's name is sticks out farther than the rest of the source. And you can look in the book on page 292 to 296 for examples of that. Another great thing to do is go to the library. You can save tons of time if you go to the library website to get citations. So I'm actually going to pull that up really quick. Here we are on the library website. I like to go into articles and databases. And honestly, for me, the site I use the most is Google Scholar. So I go into here and go down, click Google Scholar, and then let's say I'm doing my research on robotics and education, which, funny enough, that is what I'm researching. So I do that. Oh my goodness, I have all these sources. If you look over here, if there's ever a link on this side, that means you can pull up the actual PDF. What I really like about Google Scholar in particular is that I can pull up the citation just by clicking the cite button right here. Bam! MLA, APA, I have the citation right there. I can just copy and paste it. Also, they have this great little button called Cited By. So if I want to see what other articles have been written that are more recent about the same topic, I can click Cited By, and it'll bring up a bunch of other writers who used that original article that I clicked on and get a bunch more sources that are on the same kind of topic that cover the same kind of material. So definitely an awesome source to use. I definitely encourage you to use Google Scholar when you have a specific topic that you're looking for. So let's head on back to Prezi here. Ooh, there we go. All right. So we've looked at citations. Let me actually really quickly get us back to where we left off there. Here we go. library.usu.edu. I recommend going through the library website to get to Google Scholar because it'll bring up more of the PDF copies that are on Google because the library pays to get those PDF copies for you. And so that's why I'd go through the library website. And they also have many other great databases that you can use. And our librarian can help you to navigate those. Speaking of sources, these are the sources for this this presentation. I have obviously your textbook and the They Say I Say book. I really encourage you especially to go back in your textbook if you have questions. Check out Appendix 2. Use it as a reference guide. It really has great information. And finally, most importantly, don't forget, what they say must always be connected to what you say. You really want to keep that balance within your paper. Make sure that you're using the sources correctly, but make sure that all those sources are used in a way that really supports your argument, what you have to say, what you're thinking, and your persuasive voice is really coming out. If you do that, you will have an awesome paper. So I hope this has helped, and I look forward to hearing more from you if you have any questions. Thanks.